Good afternoon. Welcome to our panel on deep dive into regulations and ethics in AI. I want to thank the organizers for putting together really an amazing conference and an amazing group of panelists. So thank you all for taking the time. Artificial intelligence is really transforming every industry in the world right now. Whether it is finance, whether it's medicine, whether it's education, the pace of change is just remarkable. But the pace of change also raises concerns for us. It relates to algorithmic bias, your data privacy. It relates to the explainability of AI. How is that chat box coming up with those answers? So we need to address those issues because the change of pace is so fast. We need to make sure the ethics and regulations are in place. And that's why we have this amazing panel. They're going to take a deep dive into these issues, talking from a tactical as well as a strategic standpoint. To make this panel really valuable for you, we thought that we'll have basically quick intros for them, and they'll answer a foundation question, then we'll get into more substantive issues and end with some fun rapid-fire questions to keep all of you engaged. So, having said that, we'll start with the person on my left, Mia Dan. And so Mia, do a quick introduction, but also talk about what is right now the biggest challenge for ethics as well as regulations in AI.
Fantastic. So first questions first. Can everyone hear me okay? Yes? Okay, fantastic. Thank you. I'm so excited to be here today. My journey started in Silicon Valley as a tech blogger, back in the day where digital was still new. And along with tech blogging, I was covering the emerging technology space when Amazon was still the new kid on the block, believe it or not, and Facebook. Nobody cared what Facebook was. It was a different world back then. So since then, I have been leading technology meetup groups. We started with 2 people over a pizza, and we grew it to thousands. My corporate journey started by, I joined eBay at the time, which was one of these big Goliath. I don't know if anybody remembers eBay, but they're still around. I worked with many large tech companies, and my role was to help them adopt new technologies, right? Helping them take all of these great technologies and harnessing that responsibly. So that's where my journey started. My last corporate job was at Google, and I left that, and I joined my consulting firm, which is Lighthouse 3. So today I'm representing 2 organizations. Lighthouse 3, we work with 3 types of clients. One is for AI, if you're just getting started, you're trying to think, is this the right technology for me? There's a lot of hype around it. So what we help is help clients brainstorm use cases, help them decide, is this the right technology for you? Then we help clients who are still trying to decide which is the right vendor. We are platform agnostic. We work with all the big tech and small companies as well. We help onboard those technologies. And last but not the least, we also do performance management, which means looking at whether or not your AI investments are actually paying off. So that said, in 2018, when people were not really talking about ethics, when we would say AI ethics, they would say, what do you mean? That's when I published the 100 Brilliant Women in AI Ethics list. So big shout out to all the women who showed up today, because women have been at the forefront of AI ethics. To all of you who showed up, we do 3 things. We help elevate the voices of women who are doing great work in the space. We do educational seminars, trainings, workshops, and we help empower women. We want more women to be be invested in. We want more funding for women. We want more jobs for women. That's what we're about. So then, the question you had was, what is the biggest challenge?
Very briefly.
The biggest challenge is we are not connecting the dots between ethics and business. That, I feel, is the biggest challenge, but I'll talk more about it as we go along.
Okay.
Good?
Okay, Aadil, let's hear it from you.
Thank you, Sanjay. So, an electrical engineer turned computer scientist. In 2018, I started a consultancy, vResolve.io, focused on AI and embedded systems. So this is right before AI became publicly cool, but right after the Transformers paper, so take the hint. And like every good business, instead of focusing on our own products, we have been focusing on helping other businesses integrate AI into their overall businesses.
Fantastic. How about you, Abir?
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you today and with Sanjay and our esteemed panelists. My name is Abir Habbal. I'm a managing director with Accenture focused on data and AI. And as Accenture, we pride ourselves on being the reinvention and transformation partner for organizations all over the world. And we're proud that in the Middle East, we're able to make as well the same level of footprint we're making around the world.
Thank you. So, Aadil, let me start with you. That, we talk about large companies. You see a lot of large companies here, but there are also a lot of startups. You have a startup yourself. What role do startups or smaller companies play in setting up ethics and regulations, and how can they do that given that they don't have as much resources as larger companies? Because I'm feeling that some of them will be in our audience too.
Right, nice question. So I wish that startups played a more major role in defining AI ethics. Usually coming from the latest paradigm of creating startups around GPT or Gemini wrappers, most of the startups are actually at the mercy of bigger companies. So they can do much, and unfortunately, in all regulatory discussions, these giants are participating, but the startup community is always absent. So this is an unfortunate reality. Having said that, as AI progresses and AI democratizes, as we say it, it becomes cheaper and more accessible. I think startups will start having more say, and I think it's generally true with any form of technology that we've seen in the past.
Awesome. So, Abir, you have worked obviously with large national transformation, setting up AI policies around the world, especially with nations. Nations have to balance innovation and regulation. What challenges do they deal with, and how can countries work around those challenges?
Absolutely. That's the key debate around what is the right level of regulation for AI without stifling innovation. And this really requires an active dialogue and understanding of both stakeholders, the regulator and the adopter, let's say from another side. The first standpoint is that for adopters, even in absence of these regulations, you need to have the right AI governance, because understanding the risks, not using AI effectively can ultimately offend your direct customers or constituents, your shareholders. You might not be able to build the right level of trust and reliability in your operations. You can have a sustainability agenda and then consume unprecedented levels of AI, right? So governing AI is really a must for these organizations, whether regulations exist or not. Then from the other side, when it comes to regulator, there is a role to play here, which is about standardizing the level of principles and your definition of AI ethics, considering that not all other stakeholders will be at the same level of maturity, and considering that often enough, some misuse may happen intentionally or unintentionally. But then understanding the starting point for these different players is really key, and establishing that level of dialogue, because governments need to understand that there's a big promise of value that can come from AI, and then enabling that level of promise within these organizations is key, without basically letting the lid open on all level of risks that may come. So the aspect of to what level of governance do we want to exercise from a national perspective, and really understanding the readiness of these organizations and the operational cost that is also expected on their side throughout the adoption. And there's an aspect of not just publishing these policies and guidelines and principles, but actively maintaining that level of dialogue to refine where needed, and not really to have stringent, penalizing, let's say, implications directly, but to really understand that we are at a stage where experimentation is happening, we're moving to scaling, and the technology is evolving so fast, and hence there's a level of active communication that needs to be maintained.
That's very helpful. Thanks so much. Mia, you've been a leading voice in terms of inclusive AI, in terms of ethics and norms. How can we get past that conversation and just make that embedded in everything that happens in AI, rather than talk about diversity and things of that nature, but just make sure that companies are embedding it in all the things that they do?
Great question. it's time that we made this real, because you're right, so many people who work on ethics tend to be researchers, and there's a disconnect between how fast the research is developing, but how do you apply that? Can I just do a quick show of hands here? Just a quick show of hands. How many people here think they're ethical? Just a quick show. Yes?
That's
I like the
depressing.
honesty.
That's depressing.
That's impressive. At least 2 people admitted to being ethical. The reason I ask is we all strive to be ethical, but what does it mean to have an ethical product? Which means it should work for all of us. Like, for example, if you were to you want to buy a car. Let's take an example. You're buying a car. Would you buy a car without a seatbelt? How many people would buy a car without a seatbelt? Airbags? Maybe? Yes. It's highly unlikely. So when we think about ethics and you think about responsible AI, we have to think about practical terms. What does it mean for your product design? It means, one, it should be safe, right? If you're going at a high speed, you want to make sure you're not going to get ejected out of the car. Like, they're the basic things. So you have the level set. But then the next level up is, are you making sure it's not going to cause other harms? For that, you have to make sure that you have women, you have people of color, you have other faiths and religions represented on your design team. Because, again, one more question for the audience. How many people here have used ChatGPT? Okay, excellent. Okay, so did you know that ChatGPT 3 was biased against Muslims? Researchers found in 2021, this is not a new thing, in 2021 they found that when you put in a query, it would show up like 66% more violence associated with Muslims than with non-Muslims. So that is unacceptable, and this is why we say start designing your product with diversity at your core, so that when those designs, the output comes out, it is inclusive of everyone, because we can't have technologies that only work for like the Western world and they don't work for the rest of the world.
That's very helpful. Coming back to you, Abir, you work a lot in this region in the Middle East. What gaps do you see in AI regulations that you think that need to be addressed? I think our audience would love to know that.
Absolutely. The Middle East actually has been at the forefront of also developing national AI ethics principles and guidelines and policies right from the start, on par with leading countries who have embarked on similar transformation agendas. Today in Saudi, we have the AI ethics policy, and then we had the generative AI guidelines being published in association with that, and we see a continuous evolution, especially with the launch of the International Center for AI Research and Ethics in collaboration with the UNESCO. Similar as well, efforts across UAE and other parts of the Middle East are embracing the same level. So the question really becomes about what has been the response across the ecosystem. Is there the right level of adoption? And if not, how can really governments cater to that and really support and enabling the rest of the ecosystem to adopt? So there's the angle of really putting into practice what has been designed. The other lens in terms of further taking things to the next level becomes a sectoral discussion, right? So when it comes to health sector, for example, is it enough to have these national AI ethics principles, or do we need to actively regulate, for example, AI use in medical devices? Especially if these technologies are expected to influence how we diagnose, how we treat patients. So the sectoral lens is, I would say, the next step that needs to be looked at, and especially also with the ambition to adopt innovative technologies like autonomous vehicles and beyond. The last part becomes more about IP, which is really still a global debate around, who controls the IP behind AI, right? And the data that it has sourced from. And especially with the complexity of these stakeholders, from the people who produce to the people who trade AI to eventually to use it, there's a lot of debate around how IP gets managed, who owns it, and can really reap basically the precedence from it.
So this is obviously the big debate question that's going on. I would love to get feedback from all of you. DeepSeek was released, 2-3 weeks or whatever. It's an open source product. So open source raises issues which are very different from an ethics standpoint. So would love to get your feedback to our audiences. What are the implications when you put products out in open source? Their weights are out there. What are the implications from an ethics, from a regulation standpoint? I think I would love to know. I'm sure the audience wants to know too. So please, any of you, all of you.
I can go?
Go ahead.
Okay.
Please.
So my perspective is that open source is the way to go. I come from an open source background. And so there's an inherent problem attached with DeepSeek, and it is pointed towards China. So everyone points towards China, that this model is originating from China, and that is the problem. I tend to disagree. The most problems that we associate with China are surveillance, and might sound politically incorrect, but Facebook is also a surveillance company, and they sell your data for ads. And they have Llama, which is an open source model. So I think the problem stems from political and geographical challenges. Open source actually opens the doors towards future progress and democratization of AI. And that is what eventually would lead to more accessible and ethical AI, in my opinion.
I tend to agree as well. The growth in open source assets and capabilities has really led to AI democratization and has really led to fueling different players and from an aspect of playing on their strengths and developing the applications on top of it. There are many applications across different sectors in education, in retail, and so on that we wouldn't have if we haven't really made this technology that accessible, that as well, considering cost sensitivities as well behind it. So it's amazing what launching that technology has enabled across different parts of the world. And really as cascading from developed to developing countries. And in fact, we need to do a lot more of that, considering as well that the open source, let's say, fuel has been public data, so it only makes sense to make it also available publicly.
Mia?
Yeah. So I believe neither is perfect. So they both come with their pros and cons. Like I have an Apple phone. It's proprietary, it's not open source, and yet we use it because it's more secure. Android, on the other hand, not so secure, but not to say that it doesn't. I agree, open source does can be more innovative, absolutely. With the DeepSeek, I feel like the ethical issues remain the same. Maybe on the sustainability side, maybe we do have some benefits because it uses low compute. The compute cost comes down, the environmental resources used are lower, it's less intensive. But on the other hand, technologies are not built in a vacuum. Technologies always reflect the ideology of the funders and builders. So if some technologies built by the Chinese government or Chinese, those are the values. That's the history you're going to hear about. That's the perspective. And then if you have someone built by some folks in Silicon Valley, that's the ideology that's going to be built in. Like you say, right? One person freedom fighter is another person's terrorist. We can't think of these technologies as neutral or objective. They will reflect the society's biases.
Just to add to that, the challenge today is that if you look at DeepSeek, Llama, etc., there is no way to standardize and say this is the ethical score of all of these models. Right? And the way we do decisions is not just about intelligence, it's intelligence plus ethics. And this is the global gap that remains today, which we need the community to work actively upon.
100%. Because when I ask this question, right, are you an ethical person? I guarantee two people say yes, but what you mean by ethical is very different from what that person said. Ethics are not standard. Maybe we agree on certain things. We want to be a good parent, we want to be a good friend, and so on, but there is no common set of ethics that we can all sign off on, like, yes, this is a standard.
So to follow up on that, does ethics differ based on region, culture, values? When you look around the world, Mia, what do you think? We are here, you are from the US, you're here in a different region, there are other parts of the world. How do you define ethics from an AI standpoint for our audience? How does that work?
That's such a great question. And I have to say, I represent two different cultures. I grew up in a very conservative, very traditional culture. Very different. I lived for the last 25 years in the US. Very different culture. And I feel like the technologies will reflect the cultures of the people. So it's all of the above. So the values of the people. And again, people think of ethics, this is good or this is bad. It's not binary. And I'll tell you how that works, right? I'm a vegetarian. I don't eat meat. I have friends who are vegan. They don't eat cheese. I love cheese. But then I have friends who don't eat meat. They're pescatarian. They have fish. So am I more ethical than somebody who eats meat? And are they more, my vegan friends more ethical than me? No. It's a very cultural value-based decision. As society, we get to decide what is or isn't right for our culture. And that's why I feel like it is going to be a reflection of our society.
So the issue obviously is that there is this global south and they have history, languages, etc. The AI is trained on about Western knowledge. 60% of the internet is in English, Western knowledge. How do you balance that? I mean, I don't know if any of you have thoughts in that, because that directly applies to ethics, values, and equity in that. Any thoughts?
I think it's going to take its due course, like every expensive technology ever has. The global south will have to keep on ramping up on this. But I think the time is near. I think in the next 3 years, AI will be democratized. And I again would say thank you, DeepSeek, for that. At least they're not making money out of it. But I would agree with Mia. So ethics is a very regional and very time-bound topic, region, culture, time-bound. So eventually, for example, I don't shake hands with women, and if I would do that in West, that would probably be considered a bit rude. So if you ask an AI about this, you should get different answers based on culture, right? So I think with time, I think Accenture is already working on Middle Eastern AI. G42 is working. So I think with time, local AI ethical paradigm would emerge.
So every nation having its own AI, sovereign AI, as they say. You're going to say something, Abir?
Yeah, I mean, what you're saying is exactly the reason why we see bias in different models. So the first step is really awareness of why is this happening. The second step becomes about correction and adaptation and making sure your data is represented so you can fine-tune these models, right? So it's about the awareness and then being active in order to solve basically the root cause of the problem and see how we can move along to a more represented world.
May I add one thing? We published the first Women in AI Ethics list in 2018, long before anyone was talking about it. What we noticed this, after publishing, we published a 7th list this year. US and UK were dominant for a long time in this space. They were far ahead. But what we are finding is that's not the case anymore. The global majority countries, like the Middle East, we are seeing more action in Africa. The global majority is now becoming more vocal in this space, and I'm really excited to see that.
So as we were discussing before, that in the mobile world, that people especially in the global south, jump from not going to the landlines, they went straight to mobile phones, maybe in AI. You're going to see a lot more happening here. Abir, coming to you, you spend a lot of time in terms of data governance frameworks. Tell our audience what's next in that sphere besides privacy, data classification. What do you see happening in this whole world of governance frameworks?
Absolutely. So I don't believe I will be sharing something new with the audience when I say that data is the fuel of AI. So having the right data governance frameworks in place is actually a big advantage for you to jumpstart on your AI journey. Because it's really about understanding the data landscape that you have, who are the key custodians and protectors of that data? Do I have the right governance controls to make sure it is at the right level of quality, accuracy, timeliness, and so on? So actually data governance as an institution is key for you to be able to pivot on your AI journey and really advance towards AI addressing every single aspect of your business.
Well, that's very, very helpful. One question I think that when I do my podcast, I ask the policymakers and they ask me, and this would be something from you. The pace of change in AI is just unbelievable. It's multimodal, it's agentic AI, it's this, that. How does regulation keep pace with that? Because, you have reasoning models, it's this model, that model. How are policies going to keep pace? Thoughts from any of you, all of you?
Sure. Okay, I'll start. I look at AI, I'm using law and regulation interchangeably, but they're different things. But they serve two purposes. One is prevention. There's a reason all the cars today have seat belts, right? There's a reason, prevention. But then if a car, there have been cars, I won't name brands, which have self-driving cars which have exploded, that have run into people, caused damage. So that becomes accountability. We need both. So one is prevent harm and then hold them accountable. We need both, and I feel like that's where the challenge is, that when we keep pace is we already have existing laws. Do no harm laws, right? It's just a matter of adapting a lot of them. Like, you cannot discriminate against women. You should not be discriminating against people of color. We should apply those laws. And accountability is going to be challenging because who do you go after? You have a self-driving car. Is it the car manufacturer, or is that going to be someone who could design the software? But we still have a lot to sort out at that end. And what is an acceptable fine? For $1 trillion company, is $1 million really an adequate fine? Those are the questions still need to be hashed out. We are not there yet. I don't believe we're there yet.
So from my perspective, I think regulations always lag behind technology. It's very difficult with all the bureaucracy and everything involved and the multifaceted paradigm towards each problem. What I generally think is that we should continue to focus on products and product standards instead of AI. And think of AI as a tool that sits in a product. So if it's in a car, then the safety standards of the car are already there, and that's what we should be working on. Or if it's an IoT device, or if it's an edge device, the data privacy standards or regulations should kick in. So AI should be considered as an instrument towards a product which has to be regulated, rather than regulating or trying to regulate AI itself.
Just to add to that as well, I mean, I completely agree, and there's this aspect of establishing regulatory sandboxes. We usually talk about sandboxes as a way to innovate products and so on, but actually also to test regulations, with the right, let's say, developers, with the right users, in order to make sure they're being refined and really addressing the need without stifling innovation.
See, the concern that I hear from policymakers around the world is they don't want to see a repeat of social media, because social media was never regulated, is not regulated, and we all love social media, but there are challenges around that. So that's a big issue right now. There's an issue of concentration. There's an issue of liability. So the one other question that comes from an ethical standpoint is, and this would love to get feedback from all of you, is when an AI model makes a mistake, who is really liable? Is it the builder of the AI, the implementer of the AI, or the good folks who are sitting in this room are working on, as she said, ChatGPT, Claude, DeepSeek, etc.? Thoughts for our amazing audience here?
I'll go. So, first of all, I would say that data is liable. I come from a computer science background and still think in the same way of test-driven development. So I think all the biases originate from data, and it's seldom that someone who is training AI wants his AI to be biased, especially when it comes to commercial aspects. They're going to get a lot of hate and a lot of errors. No one is going to use their AI if it's biased eventually. So I think the major effort first goes into the data, that you have enough data for all types. And the person who's collecting this data, I think he's primarily responsible for making sure that the data is not skewed towards one entity. Coming towards who should be legally liable for this, I think the legal liability should rest with the one who is commercializing this AI without the due warnings around it. So I would term it in terms of, for example, GDPR, for example. I think GDPR is one of the best things Europe has done. among other things. But like, if someone is using AI, they tell you that this is an AI, and there are XYZ problems associated with it, it's better. If they're not doing it, and they're making money out of it, then I think they should be legally liable.
Let me just push one thing else, and then I would love to get their feedback. What happens when the AI hallucinates, and then let's say it gives you a medical diagnosis or a legal case which does not even, a reference case that does not exist, and our good audience is using them. This is not about biased data, this is actually about false prognosis. Then who is liable when our good folks are going to the drugstore to get those medicines, Aadil? Or Abir?
Yeah, so very rightly put, because one of the products that we've worked on is Qazi AI. It's a legal assistant, basically. And hallucination is one of the major problems. So how did we solve it? We cannot solve hallucination altogether. It kills the creativity, so there's a counterbalance. But what we do is that we inform, we don't remove the human from the loop. We don't remove the expert from the loop at this point, till we are sure that this is autonomously, independently working. We always have this, red text that this can be a problem. It's there to help you, but this is not the solution. Like, for example, ChatGPT has done brilliantly. If you ask it for a medical advice, it will, start with, I'm not a doctor, please ask a doctor. I'm going to tell you, but please ask a doctor. And end again with, please ask a doctor. So something like this.
So regulations basically have obligations on the developers of AI and on the users. As a developer, I need to be transparent how my model works, what data was it trained on. I need to run quality checks actively and understand, is it consistently meeting the criteria. As a user, I need to exercise a level of human oversight, right? So understanding what went wrong is really about understanding which aspect of these obligations have we not really fulfilled. Right? But this is why, as well, AI really depends on the collaboration between the business and the technical people working together, meeting their obligations, so it can derive the value that it's intended to.
So I'll provide a US-centric view, because what's happening in the news, and we're all following it. So you had the IBM CEO this morning, and I heard him at an analyst meeting just last fall. And this is interesting. He was probably one of the few people, CEOs, who publicly said that you don't need large language models, because the large language models are the ones which have a bigger issue of hallucination, because they're scraping so much data and they're using so much of it. I think a lot of people don't realize that. You can have a small language model and you can address some of the hallucination issues much better, because they're smaller and the database, that the training data set is also smaller. So that's number one. So number two is looking at the executive order that Biden administration had put out. The crux of that was that if a federal government contractor, the US federal government is one of the biggest consumers of AI technologies, huge budgets. And what they found is, if we can make the federal agencies be responsible for vetting these technologies really well for diversity and ethics, the onus is on them, right? You have a carrot and sticks. Regulation is the stick. So carrot is, if you want to work with the US government, then you basically have a carrot incentive, make sure your technology works, right? So there's the onus. So which is what we also do. We do a lot of governance vetting work. But then, because it has been repealed, what that means is the risk has not gone away. It is buyer beware. It's your risk. If you're using the technology, it's on you, because there's no recourse. Right? Individually, you can sue them, but there isn't any recourse there. And there's also an additional issue. So when you use these technologies and something does go wrong, like you said, like who is accountable, I feel like a lot of that is right now in the courts. And one last example, Adobe. There is a lot of controversy around the training data that's being used in large language models. It's all scraped from the internet, right? Many of those are from artists, creators, painters, writers. So what's going on is they're suing these companies. So what Adobe did, Microsoft did, they said to anyone using our technology, if you get sued, we'll indemnify you. That is how they're getting around it. If you can't solve the problem, then you basically indemnify your clients, so it becomes the responsibility of the user, like you said. But you'll get indemnified by Microsoft or whoever is using, whichever technology you're using.
Well, that's very helpful. As I said at the end, I'm going to put these wonderful folks on the spot and see how they come up in your eyes, and then we'll see what we can do. So I'm going to ask you some yes or no questions. Same things for all of you. Let's see, different backgrounds, different perspectives, so we'll go with that. So, should there be a global authority overseeing AI ethics, yes or no?
No.
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 Wow. We have consensus. Do you believe that AI should be self-regulated by the industry, yes or no?
No. No.
No as well.
Wow. I thought there would be some issue here. Is explainability, explaining what comes out of these things, more important than the raw model data accuracy? Yes or no? There is
Maybe.
no hedging, you got to pick one.
Can I cheat? No, maybe. No. Wait, model accuracy or?
Well, I said, is explainability more important than
No.
raw? No. What about you?
I would say yes.
Yes. Finally, we have a little bit of this differences. So, do you think most companies underestimate the need for regulations in AI? Yes or no?
No.
Yes.
Yes.
2-1. So, is the speed of AI evolution outpacing our ability to regulate? I kind of gave you a little bit of an answer, but still.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Does the current pace of AI innovation worry you, and should it worry them?
Yes.
Yes or no?
No.
No.
2 no's, 1 yes. Okay. Do you believe, final one, that generative AI is riskier than the other AI models? You know, you have people think Gen AI is the only AI, but there's, many other AI models. Is it more risky?
Yes.
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 Okay. Well, we've had some fantastic feedback. I hope the feedback that you got from our esteemed panel tells you that why there is a importance for ethics regulation in AI. I think, and that's where policymakers, industry leaders, civil society members, they all need to have these conversations so that we come up with policies. We want innovation. We want all the great things that come out of ChatGPT and others from this region. But we need this kind of guardrails that happen. So I want you all to really give our panel a big round of applause. They did a fantastic job. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you, Sanjay, for this amazing round of questions.
No, amazing job that you guys did.
Thank
I put
you.
you on the spot. Thank you.
Thank you.